Welcome to the Great Neck Library Oral History Project. Today is Thursday, September 11th, 2025. We're here today with Donna Peirez. Welcome, Donna.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about how you came to Great Neck and your connections.
Well, I grew up in Florida and had no idea what Great Neck, New York was all about. I met my husband in college at Boston University, and he was a longtime resident of Great Neck. And he invited me on our first date to a Seder at his home in Great Neck. And I spent hours worrying about what I was going to wear because I didn't want to embarrass his poor family in Great Neck. And then he picked me up and brought me to Great Neck, and I went, oh my. I had no idea what I was in for. And after we married, we moved to Great Neck and bought a house on Ravine Road where we had our first two children. And I became involved in the schools, private and public, at that time. My children went to Great Neck Community Nursery School, and I eventually became a teacher there for 12 years until I transferred and got a job in the Great Neck Public Schools teaching first grade at Lakeville for 28 years. I became very active with the Teachers Association and with my community. I was a PTA mom. I was very involved, and when I retired at 71, I didn't know what I was going to do with myself, and 5 months later found myself elected to the Great Neck Public School Board of Education. And in terms of my involvement with the community, that has been my major direction in terms of kids and what's good for them.
What kind of things have you seen change in the schools and the family dynamics here in Great Neck over the decades?
It's interesting because someone recently asked me the question about how do I see a difference with the students. And I thought about it for a long time, and then I said, our country has changed, the world has changed, politics have changed, technology has changed. We're all so much more savvy in terms of technology, and honestly, 2-year-olds know how to swipe on an iPad. But a child is a child is a child, and we still can address them the same way. We still can teach them and approach them. They're still a kid. They still need to know where their place in the world is and how to get through all the troubles or joys that they will find as they get older.
Tell me about raising your family here in Great Neck, and what was the deciding factor for you deciding to stay here to do that?
When we were first married, we lived in Jackson Heights, Queens, and my husband was in law school. And then we were both working and a little flush and decided to look for a home rather than an apartment. And my in-laws were here, so my husband sort of didn't want to live in Great Neck. And we went looking. It was the time when they were first building Dix Hills out in Suffolk County, and we went to look at these homes with big pieces of property and brand new homes. And then it took us an hour and a half to get back to Great Neck, and my husband's office was in Woodside, and he said, I'm not doing this every day. And we bought our first house in Great Neck. We have 3 children who went through the Great Neck schools. My son, who's the oldest, started at Kensington Johnson School, which no longer is in existence. And interestingly, we are now in an apartment on the property of where Kensington Johnson was. Sometimes we stand in the living room and say, I wonder whose classroom would have been right here. And my 2 daughters went to E.M. Baker School because after they closed Kensington, we were redistricted for Baker. And all 3 actually graduated from Baker because my son, after they closed the school, had to go there. And then they went to Great Neck North Middle School and Great Neck North High School. And I personally felt that they got a fabulous education here in Great Neck. They all did well going off to college and have been successful adults with families of their own. Interestingly, none of them moved back to Great Neck.
Tell me about the house that you lived in.
So we've been in 3 houses and an apartment in Great Neck, but the second house that we bought as our family grew was on Allenwood Road, actually Imperial Court, which is a cul-de-sac off Allenwood Road. And there was one large old Tudor home there. And it turns out that that was part of the main house of the Allen Farm, which when was originally built, owned, the farm went from Middle Neck Road through Allenwood Park. It had been empty for many years in the 40s and 50s, and then a Mr. Shapiro bought the land and 12 acres. And he built the cul-de-sacs, but kept a third of an acre for his own home, which was the Allen farmhouse. And although the exterior of the house remained the same as originally, he gutted the interior and modernized it. And we did a few things when we moved in. But many years later, after we were living there about 15 or 16 years, I saw some adults walking around in the backyard, and I went out to greet them, and they said, well, our father was Mr. Shapiro, who bought the house from the Allen estate, and we were just curious about what it looked like. And they were able to tell me how the interior of the house was so different, that one side of the house was all small cubicles for the farmhands to live in, and then there were 3 larger bedrooms for the family to live in, and how that changed when their father bought the house and renovated it.
Does that house still stand?
The house still stands.
What's the address of that?
It's on Imperial Court, off Allenwood Road.
Okay. Then you said you had other residences here in
Yes,
Great Neck?
after my children left for college, we downsized to a small house on the south end of town, on Upland Road, where those houses were originally built to house the workers from the United Nations, when the United Nations was in Lake Success.
And tell me a little bit about a typical Saturday or Sunday with the kids. Like, what was exciting to do entertainment-wise, or?
I grew up as an only child in a very quiet house. And so when I had my 3 children, I wanted our home to be the place where everybody came. And it was. There were gatherings all the time. All of my children were involved in sports and school activities, so the weekends were very busy and fun. We eventually built a pool in our backyard, so that really became the centerpiece of not only our lives, but our children's lives. And to this day, when we see some of their adult friends who have families of their own, their explanation is, we always went to the Peirez's for the weekend, and there were always tons of snacks for any of us to eat that we wanted.
Tell me a little bit about Middle Neck Road and the business district of Great Neck. How has it changed, and some of the most memorable stores that you...
Middle Neck Road has changed radically. There was something that I was just telling someone the other day, and they didn't believe me, but on the corner where you go down to the garage where CVS is, there was no street there. There was no cut-through. Middle Neck Road was just one solid street up until Maple Avenue. And and there was a bowling alley where CVS is now. So the kids spent a lot of time on the weekends in the bowling alley. And the stores on Middle Neck Road were very varied. Great Neck was a destination shopping area. It had all kinds of interesting shops, women's clothing, men's clothing, shoe stores, gift shops, so that there wasn't as much commonality as there is now in terms of nail places and eyelash places up and down the road. And often, well, first of all, one of the things that always made me enjoy living here with children was that on a Saturday or a Sunday, you could take your children and drop them off in town And they would go to Gino's for a slice of pizza. That's one of the few places still here. And they would go to the movies, and they would walk around town, and you always felt safe and that they were safe being in town. And that kind of was what the adults did on a Saturday night. We would come into town, eat at a restaurant, maybe Millie's, and then walk up and down the blocks window shopping and meet all of our neighbors and all of our friends right in town.
And what about one of your favorite restaurants or places
Well,
to eat?
Millie's place was really one of my favorites. Bavanda, which was a little further north in town. And it wasn't a restaurant, but Poultry Mart was an absolute essential stop. Any day at 5 o'clock, there was a line out the door, people buying food to take home for dinner. Oh, Kensington Deli, which is also still there, was a favorite. My husband my husband lived in Great Neck since 1954. And he grew up going to Squire's Delicatessen. There was on the corner of Northern Boulevard and Lakeville Road, Andre's Restaurant, which was a very fancy restaurant. And he used to go there all the time. North Shore Steakhouse, places that just aren't here anymore. Chop Meat Charlie's on Cutter Mill Road was a great place to go on a Saturday for lunch with your kids. And it was burgers, big burgers.
And tell me a little bit more about your role on the school board now. What kinds of things? Tell me what's happening on the school board.
So this is interesting because, as I said before, my interests in Great Neck in volunteering had almost only to do with kids and schools and teaching. I was a little bit involved at Temple Bethel when my children were there, but it had to do with the things that involved the children, the Temple Board of Education, a Hanukkah dinner, things where they were involved. But mostly everything else had to do with kids. And so first I volunteered as a parent at Great Neck Community Nursery School, and then I wound up teaching there for 12 years. And when I left there, I left to become a first grade teacher at Lakeville, where I taught for 28 years and became involved with the union and being a leader in the schools in that way. And when I was ready to retire, I said, if I'm not Mrs. Peirez, the first grade teacher, who am I going to be? And I was looking for something that would grab my interest. And I thought of many different things, but eventually, from many different sources, people said to me, you should run for the school board. There hasn't been a current teacher on the school board ever. You've had all the experience as a parent and a community member. You will bring different things to the school board. And so I ran, and there were 7 of us running that year, and I won the election. And I think probably because of my interest in kids. As we stood up at a informational talk to parents, the first 3 people stood up and said that they were financial analysts and they could help with the budget. And then I stood up and I said, well, I'm not a financial analyst, but I am a child advocate. And I think that may have gotten me elected that year. And as much as I thought that I knew about the schools and how easy a transition it would be for me to go on to the school board, I really was shocked at the kinds of things we would be asked to discuss and make decisions about, and the time that it took to be on the school board. Somebody said to me, oh, you'll be great, it's just a little extra reading. Yeah, that was not the case. But I am now in my 10th year on the school board, and it's very interesting. It's sometimes difficult. but I feel that I'm giving back to my community and to the kids that I have taught and will teach, or not teach, will hope through the Board of Education to allow to have the kinds of teachers I would want them to have. It's amazing to me the things that people think the school board is responsible for and the things that we really can do. So basically, we are in charge of the governance of the school board. And there are very strict rules from the state and the New York State School Boards Association about what we can and cannot do. The school board also develops policy, which becomes the governance of the state. And I think at this not the state, of the schools, at this time, I think there are 172 policies that govern us. They can all be found on the school district website if you're interested, but they govern everything from a code of conduct to transportation to sporting events, trips, really anything that has to do with the schools. We do not hire or fire any employees except for the superintendent. There are selection committees that are formed for each position that needs to be filled, and that's done through selection committees with the final say of the superintendent, and then they are announced to the school board, and if we have any questions, we're able to ask, but we are not involved in that. The budget, everybody always blames us for the budget, but the budget is actually formed with our financial assistant superintendent, a deputy superintendent now, Mr. O'Keefe, and he forms the budget with the superintendent and the other district administrators. And it's presented to us before it goes to the public for us for discussion or us to look at and say, well, maybe we should do more here or less there. But ultimately, we are not formatting the budget, or formulating. And I think this is something that most people don't know, that being on the Board of Education is a volunteer job. There is no financial benefit. We do not get paid anything. Occasionally we get a sandwich on a night when we have an executive board meeting, but that's about it.
Can you speak about the state ban on cell phones? How is that affecting Great Neck so far?
So this is new. It's a new law. It's not a ban. It's a bell-to-bell restriction, meaning, and it's really geared toward the secondary students, that from the time they come into the building in the morning until they leave in the afternoon, they are not allowed to be using their cell phones. This is a state law, not a Great Neck law. However, for a very long, not a long time, but for several years, most of our teachers in secondary schools have not allowed cell phones out during their class. And they've had like clear shoe bags on the back of their doors. And as the students come in, they put their phone into the pocket. So it hasn't been too big of an adjustment. Our elementary children and middle school children keep them in their backpacks during the school day. So far, this has not been a big to-do here in Great Neck.
Because you had been
Because we had already been doing
it.
I mean, the kids were allowed to take, the students were allowed to take their phones out at the end of a period and have it. So now they just have to be locked up for the day. There is a little bit of a discrepancy between North and South High School because North High School is an open campus and the students are allowed to go out for lunch. So when they are allowed to go out for lunch, they may take their cell phones with them. South is not an open campus because there just aren't the facilities nearby for the students to go to. So their phones are locked up for the day. And I'm sure there will be glitches or reasons that we will find necessary to adjust this somewhat, but we sent our plan to the state and it was acceptable.
Talk a little bit about your work with the Historical Society and the history of the school district.
So, I have a friend who's on the Historical Society, Carol Frank, and I have known her for over 40 years since her daughter was a student at Great Neck Community School when I was teaching there. And she had called me last summer, I guess, and said, I think it would be interesting if we presented a program to the Historical Society about the history of the Great Neck Public Schools. And would you be interested in doing it? And oh, this is right up my alley. So I said yes, and I realized that in my 53 years of living in Great Neck, I have been here for almost a quarter of the time that the schools have been in existence. So I did a lot of research, and I worked also with Mr. Rob Zahn, who runs the TV studio at South Middle and South High School. And he had an amazing amount of archival material, videos from when North High School was being built. He had pictures of the construction of North High School. And so we worked together and made up about an 11-minute video to show at my presentation. And there were so many interesting things about it. One of the things, I said I tried to pull threads through the years that affected our schools. And one thing was that students in the Great Neck Public Schools have been activists since the very beginning. And they were always out marching for things, they were out protesting for things, always different, always. There was a meat strike in the 50s, and they emptied the school and marched because there was a meat strike. There was another time when one of the superintendents was, I should step back a minute. Some teachers were questioned about what was going on in their classes, and so the superintendent was supposed to be fired, and the students all marched, and he was rehired and stayed in the district. That was Mr. Mort Abramowitz. So during this presentation to the Historical Society, I talked about after that way before that incident, there was some other strike that they said was the worst disruption in the Great Neck Public Schools. I forget what the strike was about, but the kids planned it, and at a certain time, there was only North High School, it was just Great Neck High School. Somebody yelled, "Strike!" and 1,200 kids got up out of their chairs and left the building, and there was chaos. And after that, the then superintendent was fired, and that was when John L. Miller was hired. And if you know anything about Great Neck, North High School now is called the John L. Miller Great Neck North High School. And supposedly he brought a calm and a intellectual path to the school. And when I said this at the Historical Society, a very quiet woman from the third seat says, "John L. Miller was my father." And she got up and we asked her questions and she talked about it. And it was just like such an interesting connection. Nobody had any idea she was in the audience. Oh, and there was another funny thing then also that happened earlier, that I was talking about how when Great Neck was first formed as a school district, it was, the community was very Christian. There were no Jewish residents at all. And one of the railroad magnates that lived in town wanted his tailor, Abram Wolf, to come to town and open a little tailor shop. And he was the first Jewish resident of Great Neck, and he brought his family here. And I'm talking about him at the Historical Society and about how that started the schools having to eliminate prayer in the buildings, because there was now, it wasn't everybody was the same and believed in the same religions. And as I'm talking about Abram Wolf, this woman in the front row says, "That was my great-grandfather." And she could talk about his shop and who he catered to, all the big names, the Chrysler family and the Phipps family and this and that. And it just added so much to the evening.
Talk a little bit, you mentioned before that recording is on YouTube?
Yes, on YouTube. If you go to the Great Neck Public Schools, Historical Society, actually I don't think you have to go to the Great Neck Public Schools. If you go to the Great Neck Historical Society and look up the history of schools, it's about a 10-minute video. Very interesting, very well done. Can't take credit for that. Our Mr. Zahn put it all together for me.
And you mentioned before your affiliation with the temple. Talk a little bit about how that is changed or remained the same over the decades.
When I married my husband Bill and moved to Great Neck, or before we moved to Great Neck, his family was very involved in Temple Bethel and had been since 1954. I had very little religious training growing up. I grew up in Palm Beach, Florida, where, like Great Neck in the early day, there were not very many Jewish people. And I had gone to every possible church you could imagine with my friends growing up. So this was new to me, and we joined Temple Bethel, I think in 1974, but his parents had been involved much longer than that. And Rabbi Jacob Rudin was the rabbi there, who they called the Lion of Judah. He had big puffy white hair, and when he spoke you thought God was speaking to you. And he married us, and he officiated at my son's bris. And his assistant rabbi was Rabbi Jerome Davidson, who it turned out was an intern when my husband was bar mitzvah. So there was a history with him. When we first joined the temple, there were 1,800 families of Reformed Jews at Temple Bethel. And as our community has changed, so has the synagogue, and there are many fewer families at this time. And Rabbi Brian Stoller is there now. It's different, but we're still
You
members.
mentioned your wedding. Were you married and then celebrated here in Great Neck?
Nope, we were married at my father's backyard in Yorktown Heights.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's great. Any other things that you want to share, memorable moments or exciting times in Great Neck?
Just so, I go back to the schools because there were many incidents where things happened around the schools. You know, people always say that they moved to Great Neck for 3 reasons: the commute to Manhattan, the Park District, and the schools. And so a lot of what goes on in terms of turmoil or excitement happens around those 3 things. And when Mr. Abramowitz was still superintendent, the Parkville School in New Hyde Park had only had 1 class on a grade level, and everyone felt that was not healthy for children. You couldn't separate children, you couldn't mix them up. And so there was a desire on the part of the superintendent and some members of the then board to close Parkville School. But because it was the only school in New Hyde Park, no one wanted the people from New Hyde Park to feel like they were the only ones being disenfranchised. So therefore, Mr. Abramowitz proposed that either Baker or Kensington close also. There was no reason in terms of population for them to close. There was full enrollment at both schools. But for 2 years, there were political rallies to save our schools. And there was the Baker contingent and the Kensington-Johnson contingent. There were times when Middle Neck Road was closed for marches up this road, thousands of people marching, save our school, save our school. And eventually the vote was to close Kensington-Johnson and Parkville. And only 2 schools in all the years have been sold. One was Kensington Johnson, the property, and the other is Cherry Lane in Kings Point, which is now the North Shore Hebrew Academy Elementary School. The building remained empty for many years, Kensington Johnson, and then it was purchased and resold and became in disrepair. And eventually, actually this is a little interesting tidbit too. I told you that I'm now living in an apartment on the property of where Kensington Johnson was. But there was a very tumultuous time, and it created a lot of hard feelings between the 2 buildings and the parents in 2 buildings. Fortunately, the children were not harmed. Everyone cared about them.
Do you find that people in Great Neck have the same level of passion in social issues and that sort of thing that in decades past had given them reason to rally and protest and that sort of thing about any issue, social, economic, education? Do you feel like we in Great Neck are still that passionate and driven to that level?
I do feel we're still that passionate, but about very different things. I think that we have become very politically involved, whatever side or whichever way we're going, and have a hard time listening to people who have a different opinion.
Any other things you want to share about Great Neck?
Just that it was, and I still believe is, a great place to raise a family and bring up kids, send them to school, use the facilities that we have, like the Park District, like the public library. I think we tend to be very critical of what we have until we go outside of our little bubble and see what other districts, other towns are doing. And I always come back here and say, I'm glad I'm here.
Very good. Thank you very much, Donna.
You're welcome. Thank you.